In today's episode, Ken gets bullied for being an American. Ken,
But yeah.
This is alien to Ken.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, this is not very
It's
anti-US.
like I made myself waffles this morning. I'm amazing.
It's a great accent.
Rory throws a pen at his face. He does great work with Asif takes aim at Deloitte.
This is not to single out Deloitte, by the way. This is just, insert any big four.
No, throw them under the bus.
We know they are.
Yeah.
Deloitte. This is specifically about. And we put a videographer in our reasonably priced car.
Okay, so you got the original pound. So the goal of a startup is to not make as much profit
Well, that's not the goal. The goal is to make as much profit as possible.
without paying tax.
Well, no one loves
asking this to an accountant.
Gaz discovers fraud for the first time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mergers podcast. It's been a crazy summer. Ken, Josh and I, Connor too, we've all been busy doing so much stuff, so much to tell you about over the coming months, new businesses being launched, etc., etc. But we are now back in the studio. We've got months of guests lined up, everything from crypto to crypto VC, everything you can think of. We've got so many guests coming on. It's going to be amazing. And I'm just excited to be back starting this again. With me, as ever, we have one of the few Americans that I can tolerate. Ken, how are you doing?
Doing all right. I wasn't aware we were becoming a crypto podcast. That's news to me.
Really?
Yeah.
I've not told you about this.
No.
Oh, well, I've sorted this out. It's going to be a beauty. We've got two, actually. We've got crypto VC, and then we've got one of the bigger companies in crypto.
You've got Sam Bankman-Fried.
Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah,
Sam Bankman-Fried is sadly otherwise engaged.
not available.
His team actually reached out to me, but I was like, listen. On to the star of the show, we have Asif Ahmed from Cooper Parry. How are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you? Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It's good to have you on. Thank you for coming back. Ken and I are a little rusty, but
Okay,
it's
good.
like riding
That
a
makes
bike.
three of us.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I thought we would start, obviously, head of early stage tech and sort of growth, Cooper Parry. Cooper Parry themselves quite interesting because they describe themselves as like the rebels of accountancy.
Yeah.
So maybe, do you want to tell your story in terms of what you do now, what Cooper Parry does, and then maybe we'll get into your sort of journey there.
Yeah, sure. So, firstly, thank you for having me. So I'm really excited to be here. I mean, look, Cooper Parry, I think it has a really great brand when it comes to being slightly anti-establishment. I think I would like to describe it as everyone internally as sort of a little bit of a reluctant accountant. Like we're pretty good at the job, but we just don't wear it on our chest that this is all we do.
But when you say that, you mean they're not boring?
Yeah. Fundamentally, that's what it boils down
And
to.
don't wear suits.
Don't wear suits. In fact, I think the company policy is wear something. Like not even wear like anything. It's wear
Wear pants.
Wear
in the
pants.
English sense
yeah,
of
just
it.
keep it cordial. And so I mean that really permeates throughout the whole organization. It's just a very culture focused firm, and most recently is famous for being a private equity backed accounting firm. So we have been sort of serially acquiring other mid market firms for the last 18 months or so. And I sit in the tech and high growth team and look after the early stage portfolio.
When you say sit in, obviously you run that with a couple of other partners.
Correct. Yeah. So there was two partners that left Grant Thornton to set it up in the first place.
Okay.
Steve and James. And I joined about 18 months ago. So immediately after the private equity backing, to come and head up the early stage part. So when they first joined, Steve and James, they just focused on working with scale ups and Series A and beyond businesses. And my experience for the last 15 or so years has been working with founders and really sort of spanning that pre-seed to Series A journey. And so I had always sort of run into Steve and James whenever like founders from my portfolio would graduate out of my firm. Or whenever they had founders that were a little bit too early for later stage services, they would sort of say, could you look after this founder whilst they're in that sort of phase, and then we can work together. And then it just made sense, I guess, when Cooper Parry got their backing for us to come together.
Could you maybe, for some of the listeners, and I always think of my cousin, Harry Mason, shout out, he's a big supporter of the pod, by the way, listen to every episode. He always says, sometimes I never know when you say seed, Series A, like how big is that company?
Yeah.
So if you're talking seed to Series A, roughly what revenue and what like firm value could that be?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think increasingly that definition is also changing. And to be honest, it really doesn't mean much. I think it helps with visualizing the kinds of companies we're talking about. Yeah. But when I talk about pre-seed to Series A, I'm talking about the journey of founder on his or her own, all the way to the point where they have a finance department internally. Now, whether that ends up being pre-seed to seed, whether it ends up being pre-seed to Series C, for me, that's my ecosystem. Because we are looking to help them with effectively outsourcing that finance function and getting them match ready for diligence and acquisition until a CFO can come in and take over that position for them.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that, 'cause I guess from the investor standpoint, right? And it's also split up by geography. What's pre-seed and seed in the UK or Europe is not pre-seed or seed in the US.
Yeah.
But then you'll say like how much is being raised. That could be how they're classifying seed. How much revenue are they doing? They could classify that as seed as well. So there's a few ways. I think it's an interesting standpoint that you say, when do they have a finance department is when you kind of
that's I mean, so I've always been a sort of advocate for the founders, right? So for me, it's about giving them everything that they need that they may not even know that they need, until the point that, like I said, they are able to hire a professional that can take over that problem for them. And that historically has been at the point of Series A, where a venture fund or someone will say, look, now that you've raised, whatever number, it really would make sense for you to have a head of finance or a finance lead or a VP of finance or whatever. That person tends to have come from like our world or the banking world, and so they have some sensitivities to the things that we had been doing up until that point. It just means that it's not the founder's anxiety anymore, that how are we managing our finances. So all the way from T0 to that point is our ecosystem in the early stage team.
And when I suppose the other side of that you said, which is like preparing for sale, I suppose part of the advantage of getting an actual in-house team is a bit of formalizing the books, maybe squeezing some more efficiencies and making it actually sort of desirable for sale.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think one of the main nuances of how we work is that because we were given this blank canvas as to how we would create the delivery model, we don't keep HMRC in Companies House as our North Star, which is what the majority of accounting firms would do. They'll sort of keep HMRC and Companies House as the boogeyman, right? Like we need to make sure we don't upset them. Which is fine, but that's a pretty low bar, right? Because that just means you're compliant and you're not doing anything illegally or incorrectly. Our North Star really is diligence and acquisition diligence. So really when we're working with seed stage businesses, yes, we need to be compliant and keep Companies House and HMRC happy, but fundamentally the founder needs to be reassured that when this whole tin of worms gets opened at a Series A due diligence event, there's not going to be a ton of questions that they're either not going to be able to answer or they're going to be massively embarrassed to answer. And similarly on an acquisition. And because actually this whole team has been born out of diligence specialisms. So, James, who heads up the tax part of our team, does a lot of diligence for later stage businesses, a lot of diligence for venture funds. And then when you just flip that work, you can understand what the founders need to be focusing on.
Yeah, because I've heard from Series A and mostly Series A, because that's kind of where a lot of these things are kind of formalized.
Yeah.
There's a lot of solutions and platforms out there that help preceding seed stage companies do their legals and things of that nature for the round. We're not going to name who they are or say anything like that, but I guess you guys are kind of competing with them in a more bespoke way. But I guess you guys are also getting that top 10% of those customers that are VC backed that say their lead investors are saying you're going to do it this way because we want you to be ready.
So I have a slightly philosophical position on the people that you're talking about in that I don't actually think we are competing with them. We're only competing with them on a misconception, right? So we're not fundamentally doing the same thing. So what we are saying is that if you are a high growth business that wants to perpetually be in a good position to raise money or get acquired, then we know exactly how to look out for you in that scenario. What those companies are doing is saying, if you are low on budget and need a quick solution to this problem, we've got a solution for you. They're fundamentally not the same thing. Yeah. And I think that they know that too, but it's not in their interest to make that distinction. And, I just think even just out of the bat, the worst people to give a self-serve platform to are people that have never done it before. It's like how about we give you this platform so that you don't even know if you're doing it incorrectly. Right. And so that's, and inevitably that's what ends up happening, right? Is that we get to like Series A, or the lawyers that we work with will do diligence at Series B. And like an eye-watering amount of money is spent on reversing all of those things.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Well, I'm trying to think of an analogy, and I don't... Shut up.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of an analogy.
I actually call a lot of these companies called buy now, pay later.
Yeah.
Because that's what inevitably ends up happening, is that you buy them now, but you end up paying for it later.
Those lawyers pay lawyers later.
Yeah. Lawyers love it because they know it's like free work.
Those pencils are just on fire.
Yeah.
Anyone paid hourly. Baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I was going to say, the analogy of what did he say? Don't give people who've never done it before a self-help platform.
Yeah.
The amount of people, like as a private banker, sort of former analyst, who showed me their, smart investor or HL savings account. And they're like, can you just take a look? It's not doing so good. And I'm like,
I call this GameStop I bought.
Yeah. They're like, well, I'm 80% BT. And you're like, what? What? That is wild. And like, what's the other 20%? They're like, Theranos. I'm like, I have some horrible news for you about all of this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think generally, like, there's so much that's good coming out of the technological shift and helping people sort of empower themselves in small businesses. But I don't think we should lose that professional edge and element to it.
And no, I don't shy away from the fact that I don't think that it would be possible to do what we do unless we'd had the advocacy of Cooper Parry to do it, right? And that's why no other firm does it, is because it's not easy to get right, because so much of the work up front is unprofitable. So many large corporates can only stomach that for so long, right? Like, we know that the investment in the relationships has a long tail effect, which is why we have now some companies that we incorporated that just raised at like $3 billion valuations, right? So, you really see that whole journey. But if my sole existence was based on making revenue from unwitting founders, like what incentive do I have to tell them what the right thing is versus what the wrong thing is?
I guess on that too, right? You mentioned building out this private equity backed firm, how you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And after you guys have been, Grant Thornton, PwC, and from these more institutional firms, what did that look like, and how do you describe it as being different? Of course, we see how you guys, the work that you do, but internally, how you operate, how is that different from what you guys have been before?
I think, look, I sort of look at professional services on a spectrum, and the spectrum is basically how far into the spectrum are you of the belief that a professional services organization is only as good as the individuals inside the room, right? The very big institutions, they completely ignore that fact because they can lean on their brand, right? And so basically you're not talking to Joe Blogs or whoever, you're talking to PwC or KPMG or Deloitte and EY, and everything behind the brand is like homogenous, right? And then all the way down to the one-man band firm who recognizes that this brand means nothing, and so everything has to be about personal relationships and what they personally bring to the table. I think what's great about Cooper Parry is that we're almost right in the middle of that spectrum, where the appreciation for the individual is at its peak, and we are not in a position but we can rely on the brand only so far as social proof. We can't rely on it to like win work for us. We can't rely on it to cut through things that we may do incorrectly. Like, we're still very much having to put our own reputations on the line. So that spectrum, I think Cooper Parry is right in the great place to be able to service this ecosystem, where you need to have personal relationships, but you need to also have the scale to be able to manage a company that's growing 10x a year, right? Like, they may be international within 12 months, and suddenly the small firm is now completely upside down on being able to help that firm. So yeah, that's kind of loosely how I think about the difference between what we do versus what the big firms do and what the small firms do.
And how, I know we sort of addressed this a few ways, but how would you say you differentiate in terms of, it feels like everyone nowadays wants to do that cradle to the grave, one-stop shop, full service suite. I mean, there's so many of these buzzwords thrown around in private banking, accountancy, like marrying wealth management to tax advice. But how do you, apart from culture and branding, like how do you go about really separating yourself from the crowd? Or does that come down to you and your ability to win these businesses?
So I think I can speak for the firm, but I'll speak more specifically for the tech and high growth team, is that we first and foremost, want to provide value first. So that's in any domain, right? Whether it's with founders in the early stage ecosystem or CFOs in the later stage ecosystem. And anyone that's familiar with our activities, I hope would be able to vouch for that, because it's pretty hard to miss kind of some of the stuff that we're doing. And everything that we do in a commercial capacity is a dividend from that activity.
Okay.
Right? It's not the other way around. And that is the way that we speak to the team about how we work, how we approach our conversations, is that, effectively we want to be helpful. We want to make meaningful introductions. We want to be able to make meaningful introductions to venture funds where we can. And if that personal equation gets to the point where that CFO or that founder wants to work with us in a commercial capacity, that's the right way around for us. And so, to your point around the cradle to the grave and how we manage to make that work, there's we're not really in the business of convincing people that we are the right firm for them. It's like, if they are the right firm, they'll understand that just from the language that we use. So if we're in the business of sort of saying, oh, well, Joe Bloggs is charging us £200 and you're charging us whatever, and it's fundamentally not the same service. Yeah, we're in a very specific, and which is why actually the majority of the work that we do is through our relationships with venture capitalists. So I've got a friend here, is because they understand the value of it, right? So like a venture fund will know that if there is an accounting firm that is looking out for diligence protection, that fundamentally protects my investment from coming under scrutiny at the next funding round. And so we need to strongly encourage our founders to make sure that they are sensitive to the same things as well, as opposed to optimizing for just who can do it the cheapest.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that does tie into, for looking from a funding round from investors and founders, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of due diligence that's going off on the lead investor that a lot of follow-on checks are due. I mean, for what it's worth, we are a minority check ourselves. But there's just a certain standard of legals that certain firms just will not tolerate, right? Because they're protecting their investment from day one. And I think a lot of times, from a legal standpoint, I know a lot of VCs could, from minority checks, be protect their investment there. But I mean, if we talk about the actual tech and market due diligence they might be doing, might be a different conversation.
I mean, the a classic example of that we had not so long ago, where a client of ours said that, look, I've been approached to be acquired for, call it double-digit millions. And we've been running for 3 years. We were hoping to exit in a few years' time. So we still had some way to run, but we think a 20 million, 30 million exit is a good outcome. Cool. Now, the other side's advisors were Deloitte, right? Now, on the very first call, this is not to single out Deloitte, by the way. This is just, insert any big four.
No, throw them under the bus.
We know who they are.
Yeah.
Deloitte. Well, this is specifically that. Okay.
No, but they threw, I think, 11 people on the first call, right? Now, imagine if you're just like Mr. or Mrs. Founder, who's really got your fortunes lined up to this deal happening successfully. On the other side, you've got 11 Big Four trained diligencers who are going to find any reason to let their buyer find some sort of creepy crawly in this business. Like that's an equation you don't want to be up against.
How
Right?
many of those individuals were associates or analysts?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't look at their footers, but like, but my point is that look, even if they find in a $20 million business, if they find a 5% risk, which can chip the valuation, that's their fees paid for, right? But that's meaningful chip on Joe Blogg's founder who is hoping to. So my point is that like, that is an extreme example, but it's at those times you're like, I wish I just hadn't scrimped on the local accounting firm when we were going through the early years, because they know also that the best place to find the sensitivities is when the cash was tight and they would have made some weird decisions. So let's just go straight into there, try and find some things that are unquantifiable and put an unquantifiable hedge on the chip on valuation we want to do, because good luck arguing against us. And that sort of situation is where you really want a diligence focused team on the other side, and it's unlikely to be quote unquote Deloitte if you're an early stage founder.
So it's quite a weird, I'm trying to think like through this in real time. It's quite a weird sort of thing to go up against, I suppose. It's like a founder, I mean I get it, but as a founder who's put their heart and soul into this business,
It's ruthless.
to then when you're like trying to find your feet in the early years, COVID hit, you didn't quite able to close a round because stimulus hadn't come in or whatever, and you're like, suddenly you're getting whacked.
I think it's one of those weird times where startup space will hit those corporate or enterprise levels. I mean, of course, there's usually the corporate customer or enterprise customer, but when you're looking at selling more than a product, your company is the product. It becomes a very different game.
Yeah, and it hits you sideways, right? Because you're like, if you're this incredible business that's throwing off amazing revenues and you're generating cash or whatever, but suddenly something like completely innocuous, or at least you thought it was innocuous, like, oh, what did your contracts with your contractors look like? Oh, you didn't like sufficiently protect your IP in these contracts. Like, oh geez, like that's not a risk we can quantify. So we're going to suggest that our client pushes back on the valuation.
Wow.
And that's like, you're like, I didn't even know that was something to be worried about. But more often than not, if you're working with a firm that isn't that way inclined either, they wouldn't even have known that that's something that they should be warning you about. Right. So
I guess if we're still in the exit conversation, like, I think there's a good faith component, right? And I think, everyone should win on an exit.
Yeah.
Right. But if you're a seller and a buyer, like how do you maintain that? If you're we're going to throw this out the window because of this innocuous thing, we're going to kind of throw it on the valuation because of this. At what point is there just bad blood in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, it's not always contentious, right? And normally, more often than not, you've got a willing buyer and a willing seller. And that's not just an acquisition, by the way. Also, we're talking about, even at Series A, Series B, where you have a willing investor. Ultimately, if you get the impression that they're just trying to find ways to screw you, then that tells you something about the people that you're doing business with, right? And so that's a decision for the founder at that time to take, whether it's a venture fund or an acquirer. But like this is just first principle stuff, right? Like if I'm an advisor being paid to help my client buy a business, I'm going to do whatever I can to show that I did a good job and justify my fee. Even if that is at the expense of a well-meaning founder.
Do you think in the ever-changing world we're in, with the rise of technology, tech-enabled solutions, bloody blockchain, everything, like, is this going to change, or is this just human incentives? Hey, I'm trying to buy your company. I want to pay as little as possible or invest. I want a cheaper price. Dog eat dog. My team's bigger than your team.
Yeah.
We're going to find an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, just using first principles, this is like the art of negotiation is older than time itself, and so I think that's not going anywhere. I do believe that there is probably going to be a bit more, to your point, like whether it's using technologies or blockchain, etc. I mean, there's already so much more transparency around performance metrics and KPIs, and there's not really that whole lot of smoke and mirrors really around empirical data, which is a shift in itself through technology. So I think we're getting to the point where like the the margins in which things can be negotiated will probably shrink.
Okay.
But yeah, look, again, just fundamentally, a buyer is always going to want to pay as little as possible, and a seller is always going to want to sell at the highest possible price. So therein lies your transaction.
So yeah, I like that. It just sort of reduces the standard deviations
Absolutely.
of outcomes. But,
Yeah.
So you converge to a fair deal, but you're never gonna lose that sort of negotiating edge.
Yeah, which is accented by the non-financial motivations of each side, right? So, if you've got a desperate founder, then it skews the distribution a little bit. If you've got a really willing buyer, then that again skews the distribution. But in a perfect market, then that's where you'd end up, I reckon.
And I think maybe to transition onto your personal journey,
Yeah.
Perhaps we could do the transition sort of via your book. Does that
Yeah.
Does that help you sort of win favor with clients? Has that helped you?
Yeah, I think so. I think, those that, I guess, do the customary Google of the person before they speak to them, and then they see that I've written a book that did
You're taking stray shots at me? Or?
reasonably well. No. The fact that I think the book did reasonably well, I suppose, gives some social proof. And for me, it was just a really cathartic way of spending my COVID lockdown days. And I was just fortunate to be, given the opportunity with a publisher to write a book. But yeah, my personal journey started, as you mentioned, at PwC, and I trained there as a chartered accountant. And all the time that I was there, my father was unwell, had cancer. But then when I qualified, he relapsed with cancer, but in his brain. And he was, your stereotypical one-man band accountant who just had like a, spare room in the house, local businesses, doing basic accounts and tax returns and stuff like that. But the fact that he had brain tumors and was not going to come back to work meant that I had like a very real decision to make between, do I continue on my newly qualified salary at PwC, or do I take the like 4K extra that my dad's business makes and try and make that work? Namely also because back in the day, his answering machine was just going nuts of people trying to get hold of him and him not basically ever being in a position to come back. So I made the decision to quit PwC and look after his business, because my mum was looking after him. My brother had just started university, so it's a bit of a deadlock of options, really. And so 2000, this is like 2008, 2009. And I very quickly realized that when you're doing the chartered accountancy qualification and when you're working for a firm like PwC, the last thing you learn about is actually accountancy, right? I worked on $1 billion M&A deal before I knew how to put a P&L together.
I remember joining the grads with the other grads.
Yeah.
And there are people in audit, and 3 weeks later we'd meet in a coffee room. And they were like, "How are you doing?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think I know most of the partners' names at this point, and I'm gonna start my first exam soon." And they're like, "Oh, we've done our first 2 exams. I'm really being billed out at £70 an hour." And you're like,
"Yeah, how's
dude,
that possible?"
You just called it EBITDA.
Yeah,
you just
EBITDA. Yeah.
You don't know anything.
Yeah, this is it's an old institution and it works well, and I'm sure they'll continue using it as long as they can. But yeah, look, and maybe my transition was too big as well, right? You can't go from selling the Formula One to private equity and then suddenly working with the local news agents and expect there to be transferable skills. And so I thought, right, there's gonna have to be a way of making this either more enjoyable or make myself more useful. And so I thought, right, I'm just going to focus on working with entrepreneurs that are my age, doing things that I can relate to. And, whether it's they're making apps, because apps was a new thing back then. Either I'll become really good at it, or it'll just take them so long to realize that I don't know how to do the job that I'll have figured out my career by then. Because what do entrepreneurs know, right? Back then. So, and so that was just a real Hail Mary of a decision, right? And I was just really fortunate to be a graduate of the recession, where I knew a few founders who decided forget the corporate life. I'm just going to go set up my own business. And so that gave me a bit of a running start, literally like charging them very small amounts of money to be doing everything for them. And so like, I remember that there would be times where like, it's ironic given the size of my team and my position now that I'm dressed like this, because when back there I was wearing like double-breasted suit, pocket square, shoes, briefcase, like trench coat, going to pick up like a bag of receipts to do a VAT return. Just because it was like, just try and fake it till you make it. And that was the Hail Mary, but the good fortune was that the ecosystem started to develop unknowingly in London, like the whole London startup scene. And it became reasonably easy to be well known as someone that focuses on working with founders, because really no one else was working with founders. And so I ran that firm from 2008 in various iterations all the way to 2023, at which point that firm was acquired by Cooper Parry.
Okay. There's like two things you mentioned. And one, I think the F1 story is like really cool. Yeah. I think we could probably get into that, but I think what's really interesting, but you're taking over your father's business, right?
Yeah.
And that's on the topic of, I guess, family legacy or even personal legacy.
Yeah.
You took over that, and then you kind of made a transition to doing entrepreneurs, kind of making it your own. So like, how does taking over your father's legacy, seeing how he ran his business, go into how you have gone on to make your own legacy in the space?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because it's like I have such specific examples of how it has influenced the way that I work with founders now, and just really having that long-term vision with. So my dad was slightly older. I guess he got married a bit later, had kids a bit later in life, and so when I took over his business and I was sort of telling his clients, a lot of whom had like seen me in the kitchen when I was like 4, and then suddenly now seeing me as someone that was now their accountant. Firstly, they think they've landed on their feet. They're like, PwC accountant is now going to be doing our accounts. And they're like, I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. But the one thing that really stuck with me is that there was a core handful of clients who, when I had the like courage to tell them that, look, he's not coming back to work, right? And that was a really difficult thing for me to do, because if they had all left, that was game over for me, right? And I left PwC, didn't have a job, that revenue would have fallen off a cliff. All of them were just like, whatever your dad needs right now, like we're here with you, right? Now we're talking about businesses that like are not big by any stretch of the imagination. These people are very fluid, like they can be very fluid when it comes to moving to other advisors. Like they don't have the time or the bandwidth to like invest in some kid who needs to figure out how to run an accounting firm.
And also I was going to say on that, these are businesses that, and I say this to my mum all the time. She goes, I know you're dealing with bigger fish than me in London. I'm like, but mum, I know this is all your money.
Yeah,
this is your business. This is everything you have. Like, you don't need to hide behind.
Yeah.
And it's so like,
absolutely.
Even if they want to be loyal, there's an element of like, we're really sorry what's happened. We really like you, but we just can't risk it.
Yeah.
This is our entire family.
And I would have been tough, but I would have understood it, right? And there's particular examples of companies that I now still work with, despite me now having had a tech focus for like God knows how long, who have nothing to do with the world that I'm now in, but who are like, we wouldn't work with anyone other than your dad or your dad's son. And like some of them who are like, your dad used to come and do my books in my kitchen when I didn't know my ass from my face. And now my business turns over 30 million a year, literally, in certain cases. It's like, for me, like I could never find a way of repaying that investment that he made in me, right? Now, fast forward, why do I advocate for the founders is because I started my career in that whole mess that I was describing earlier. I had the good fortune, in and amongst all of the mess, that my career started when I was like 23 years old, right? Or 22 years old. Where were we? Like 2009? Yeah, 23, 24. So I had the ability to take a long-term view on how I wanted to build my brand and my career. And I always sort of, without having any data to support it, knew that like the paying it forward would come good. I just had that, and namely because of my dad's experiences, right? And like in a weird way, I had benefited from my dad paying it forward. He hadn't, but I had the faith that if I did the same, it would work for me too. And I always, in like early stage founders, see my double-breasted suit-wearing self when I meet a new founder, to be like, you're that double-breasted suit-wearing person who's trying to figure it out and trying to, you know, go and collect a bag of receipts from someone to buy to do a VAT return. And I need to be like the person that you're looking for, right, in that situation, because you know everyone else is trying to F you, basically, or trying to screw you over. So that was and you know, I've worked with thousands of founders at this point, and like hundreds of them have failed and are no longer clients, and that's fine, right? Like I'm more than happy to have made that investment with no ROI, because my ROI is not like founder specific. My ROI is like career driven, if that makes sense. So like on an aggregate basis, if I have positive ROI, like it worked.
Right. And I guess, you know, on that topic too, you know, your father spent all that time building rapport, and with that came loyalty, the human investment, and you've kind of transferred that into dealing with startups. I mean, probably more than the small businesses, but
yeah, for sure. I mean, like the startups, you know, those startups is such it's a whole industry now, right? In 2009, 2010, back then it was literally people putting everything on the line to like make a dream work or to support their families or whatever. Like startup is a cool thing to do now. Like being a founder is something that people wear proudly nowadays, and people can recognize it as a cool thing, like a progressive thing to do on your CV. Back then it was like a real leap of faith that I want to go and build something.
Were you quite like a loose cannon if you left a sort of Lehman or Barclays to go?
Yeah, I mean, we're still talking. I mean, look, everyone that I grew up with at PwC is a partner there now. Like, they're earning good money. Their lives have worked out. And all that they did was grit their teeth for 15 years. And they got there. So, you know, that's the opportunity cost of doing something that you want to do, that you're passionate about, is that you could. Like, the corporate conveyor belt is there for the vast majority of us, right? Like the vast majority of us should do that, and that's a great way to live your life. It's the benefit that you get for, you know, studying, getting the right grades, being, you know, interviewing well, all of those things. It means that you get a somewhat of a ladder made for you. But back then, 2008, 2009, if you were a founder, like with no real venture ecosystem, no exit ecosystem, that's for sure, and you wanted to go and build something purely because you thought it was a good idea, it was a bit delusional, which is why the success rate was so low as well back then. But you know, thankfully it's turned into an ecosystem since then.
Yeah, I mean, on the sort of like traditional career path, I think maybe a good way to segue into like the sort of third and final segment, which would be sort of advice to the next generation. I will sort of say that from my seat, I obviously, you know, invest on behalf of a lot of MDs, partners at big law firms. I wouldn't know what the percentage split is, but over 50% of them don't enjoy their job.
Right.
Like it's just, it's true. And it's quite interesting because it becomes so relative that I've got a client who I really like, lovely guy, a lawyer on 1 to 2 million a year. Maybe probably 1 to 1.5, and he's like, yeah, well, Rory, the thing is, like, obviously I've not been as successful as all my friends and my contemporaries, and I'm like, yeah, not exactly a man of the people, but okay. But he's like, I'm so much happier. It's like after I missed my daughter's first birthday, I decided that was enough, and I prioritized work-life balance. And I think just everyone gets so caught up in the rat race.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping you're going to validate this monologue by saying that, like, you know what? If you spoke to those people at PwC, how many people of them could say that, like, you know, I followed in my father's footsteps, and I've got thousands of founders who, like, almost honour his legacy by the work you do and the relationships you build with them and carried forward sort of on his behalf, not on your own behalf, and are really content in their job. For people just saying, you know what, I just stuck at the grind, took the easy option, didn't take the risk.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a great privilege, but I can't take credit for having designed the circumstances, right? Those kind of fell upon me. I suppose where I will credit myself, because like increasingly I've had to become better at, I suppose, accepting things that I've done well. Like, I think it's quite a British thing to like be reluctant about accepting victories or whatever.
Stiff up a lip. And
exactly.
Ken,
but yeah,
this is alien to Ken.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, this is not very anti-US.
Like, I made myself waffles this morning. I'm amazing.
It's a great accent. So look, I mean, I always say, like, if I got handed these lemons, then, you know, I made some pretty decent lemonade out of them. Again, I don't begrudge the people that do the corporate thing, because it's like, that is what the majority of people I think should do. Because, you know, not everybody has a desire to do something maverick, right? Some people just want the forecastability of a secure life that puts them at somewhere where they like the look of, in a house they like the look of, you know, with kids in the schools they want them kids to be in. And that's great, right? Because ultimately it's horses for courses, right? It's like what fills your cup. And I'm, you know, I can speak in hindsight now that it's like, for me to live a career that isn't driven by my values and by what I want to achieve, then I would have ended up being a very miserable person. I've just been very fortunate that I was forced into that position. And I have absolutely no qualms about suggesting that I am effectively bearing the fruit of the seeds that my dad planted, because frankly, even though it was a very difficult time, it was, and you know, bear in mind, we're talking about a very small business here, right? So we're not talking about, oh, you know, he's left me with this corporate empire that I then just managed to take over. We're literally talking about like one filing cabinet and a part-time staff member. And then for me to find out a whole bunch of other issues that he had that he wasn't able to deal with. But I think like the 2 or 3 nuggets around how to work with people, how to value their trust, and how to have a long-term mindset kind of sort of set me up a little bit to have a reasonably successful career in professional services. Right. Because I think on that spectrum that I was talking about earlier, I've never been of the mind that I can sit behind a brand. Like, I've always been, it has to be about me, my relationship, or the now team that I have, their relationships with the individuals. So I'm very grateful for it.
That's amazing. We could talk ad nauseum about hiding behind brands.
Yeah.
But you had mentioned, you know, a set of circumstances that kind of put you in that place. But I think there's also a component of, I guess, hearing that call and answering it, because how many individuals would have maybe been in those same circumstances, but okay, well, my way of supporting the family would be like, well, I need to stay at PwC so I could support everything going on, right? I mean, it was very, you might not feel it's intentional, but it's a very intentional choice to take up the mantle.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's and look, I've received just as much as I've given, if not more, right? So again, I there's definitely things that I can take credit for, but I think maybe with early stage founders, I just resonated so much with the vulnerability of it, because I was so super vulnerable. Like, imagine you're going from good school, good university, good degree, chartered accountancy qualification, probably going to go work at a private equity house because that's what I trained in, all the way to like, are we going to be able to eat? Because if this client leaves, that's like £300 a month I'm not going to have anymore. And like seeing that sort of struggle in a founder, I'm like, I get that. I get your struggle. And look, and now, especially now to bring it all the way to today, now that I have like the machine, right, of a firm the size of Cooper Parry, sorry, not PwC, of Cooper Parry, even more so, I'm like, okay, what can I give you guys, right?
Yeah.
To like enable you guys to win, right? I mean, yes, accountancy services, great. Like, yeah, we can do that. But like, can I help you raise a round? Can I help you introduce you to a customer? Can I do all of these things? And which is why when I talked earlier about being a reluctant accountant, like, yes, that is my qualification and that is what the category the firm falls under.
Yeah.
But I never lead with the services, right? The services are a given, right? We're an accounting firm, we do accounting, great. But there are so many other things that I just want to be able to give to founders. And that is what I believe is my personal job.
I mean, you're Ken, to give Ken his flowers as well. He's very good at sort of giving and helping. I think one of the first things you did to me was introduce me to a load of bankers in Canary Wharf.
Yeah.
Just
That's what I do.
Huh?
That's what I do.
God, you know what? Scratch that from the record, guys. Take out the compliment. Just go back to riffing on his American heritage. Yeah, no, but I do think, I genuinely do think, especially as I get older. I mean, I moved to London 2 years ago.
Okay.
And obviously, no, from Bristol.
Okay.
Went to Bristol originally.
Okay.
And just had to like make a network because you're competing against people at Goldman.
Yeah.
That have been there for like 20 years and have like 7 people on their team.
Yeah.
And I was like, just out of my depth.
Yeah.
But once you build it and you can actually, the best thing is once you can start making introductions, you get a bit of a circle, like a virtuous circle.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Where people then refer things back to you or invite you to something where you then meet someone and the job becomes so much more fun as well because you actually feel like you're doing a good job as opposed
100%.
to just someone sending you an email and you going, shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know anything about like Guernsey tax law and I don't know anyone who does. I'm useless. Like, it's like, oh, actually, I know Marcus. He's a good guy. I'll send it to him.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And again, like, I think I've been so fortunate to have been in this ecosystem now for so long that I've really got to know some really cool people, really helpful people that are like value aligned. Like, I would have absolutely no problem if I ever met a pre-seed founder to introduce him to Ken and be like, you should definitely meet him. And you know, like these sorts of relationships are like, you can't buy them and you can't hack your way to them. Like, you have to have done the yards to like have earned that network and community. And so yeah, I completely agree, and I'm glad you found your tribe also.
Gaz behind the cam, we're trying to get him more involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, we think
He's
we
not
think he
listening.
should do. No, he's zoned out.
Yeah. No, he's
Shall we
playing Wordle
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's texting his new girlfriend actually.
with one hand.
Ooh.
What's he doing with the other hand?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know at what point we're going to edit this out, but he's going to have a nightmare listening.
leave it all
to
in.
this. But no, we're trying to get him more. He does great work with this.
Yeah.
Like he'll be able to edit that whole thing out. And so we want him to do more work in the VC space. But
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a conversation about where does a pound or a dollar go before you arrived. It was a good thought experiment.
Yeah. Go on.
yeah, so
Talk me through it.
So actually, I was gonna end on a lightning round.
I was gonna say, I thought you were gonna say riddle. I was like,
No,
please
no.
don't do that.
But maybe you could explain to Gaz. So he's quite confused. He goes, "What did he say?" He goes, "Right. So you have the
Wait,
original
what
pound.
do we ask? What was your question surrounding where does a dollar go?
Do you wanna come on camera and give us the original pound speech?"
Okay, so you got the original pound.
Yeah.
The
Right.
original pound.
The very first.
The pound that comes out of the building, okay,
Yeah.
when the government makes the pound, right?
Yeah.
And then the government somehow gives that to companies, right? So you get a company that has money,
Yeah.
but then when the company is a company, they get taxed, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then to be able to be a company in the UK, and then when you have employees, then they pay the employees. That
Yeah.
same pound gets taxed again to the employee.
Yeah.
And then when the employee, like, I don't know, pays for something,
Yeah.
the same pound gets taxed again.
Yeah.
So in my head, I'm like,
It's
does
disappeared.
it just the pound just stop?
Just keeps getting taxed.
Just getting smaller and smaller. Like,
Yeah.
and then if you get, save that pound that's been taxed over time,
Yeah.
and then you die, then the government takes more from it.
from inheritance.
And then you
Yeah.
die. Whoa.
And then I'm dead, and my kids have what, 5p left?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah. So I think what you're confusing maybe is physical money versus non-physical money.
Okay.
There's a lot more non-physical money than there is physical money.
That makes perfect sense.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So like, let's say for every pound coin, there is like 1,000 pounds
Yeah.
additionally
Okay.
that exists in computers. Right.
Yep.
So what you're suggesting is that how is it possible for the same pound to get taxed over and over and over again?
Yes.
But that's not essentially what's happening, because in a company transaction, for example, it will only be taxed on the number of pounds it receives minus the number of pounds that it spends. So if you have received more than you've spent, that's what you're getting taxed on.
Okay, so over a
year
certain
or whatever.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if, for example,
Profit.
over a year, if I've received £100 coins,
Yes.
and I've spent £20 coins, right, and I'm left with £80 coins, then out of that £80 coins,
Yes.
I'm paying whatever 20%, £16 over back to the treasury.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
So it's not like,
So the pound coin doesn't diminish, but the profit margin does.
so the profit that I've created
Yes.
as a result of having traded more in than out
Yes.
is what I'm giving some of it over to in tax.
Okay. Okay. So the goal of a startup is to not make as much profit
Well, that's not the goal. The goal is
Okay.
to make as much profit as possible.
without paying tax.
Well, I mean, no one loves paying
Asking
tax.
this to an accountant.
Gaz discovers fraud for the first time.
I've got no qualms about this. Like, so
Fraud's only illegal if you get caught, right?
Most crime is illegal if you get caught, but only if you get caught.
yeah,
You know?
but you're right. Is that no one wants to pay a penny of tax more than they need to,
Yeah, then they're legally required to. So
and they're legally required to.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that involves every strategy under the sun,
Right.
which is legal.
yes.
Right, to say, okay, how can we get that £16 that you ended up paying on that £80 of profit,
Yes.
or whatever it ends up being, down to maybe £11 through certain reliefs that are available, or
Yes.
strategies that are available to you.
Yeah.
And companies pay firms like mine to find those strategies
Right.
to make that number as low as possible.
Okay.
And then when that number is determined to be as low as possible,
Yep.
they then transfer those £11 back to the treasury.
I see. Okay.
Or
Understood.
HMRC in this case.
Correct.
And then HMRC then redistributes that £11 back to the budget deficit, or the budget spending, whatever they've got planned for
Okay.
spending tax dollars.
Okay. Okay. So if you're a startup and you're trying to, like, I don't know, start a business or something.
Yeah.
Is it more important to focus on increasing like profit, or like trying to figure out, like, is it good to invest everything into the business,
Yeah.
or is it better to, like, keep profit and, like, keep that cash available? I guess
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Great
yeah.
question.
I'm actually slightly worried he's taking my job.
Yeah. Do you know, the thing is, like, the
Not as
fact,
good looking there,
if
okay.
people ask that question more often, I think we wouldn't have got into the mess that we got into.
Okay.
So I always look at it as, like, there's two fundamentally different types of business, right?
Okay.
There are companies that are building technology, and that is their business,
Yes.
right? And then there are businesses that use technology to run their business.
Understood. Yes.
Okay. It's taken this ecosystem a long time to differentiate between those two things.
Okay.
Everything we just classified as tech company.
Is that what those, like, B2B, those, like, abbreviations are called when, like,
Business to
they-
business.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, business to business is just that my customers are other businesses.
Oh, okay. All right.
Whereas B2C is my customers are just any
Customers.
person
Us.
on the street.
Okay.
Right. So that distinction is a huge distinction, right?
Okay.
Which companies are building technology for other people to use, like AI technology or whatever.
Yes, yeah.
And which companies are just using technology to sell something, right?
Understood. Okay.
Whatever that might be, like ASOS, whatever, you know,
Yeah.
they've got a website,
Yes.
marketplace, whatever you want to call it. These businesses that are in the building technology or building intellectual property,
Yep.
it's pretty common for them to not worry about making a profit,
Okay.
because they have to front load all of the expenditure to create something of value that can then be sold, right?
Okay.
So the sort of graph of expense to cash generation is that you start very heavily in the red, because you have to pay engineers,
Yes.
you have to pay software people, you have to pay for whatever technology,
upfront
hardware,
investment.
people, rent, all of the other things.
Okay.
but you're not worried about selling anything yet because you don't know whether you're going to be able to actually build that technology.
Okay.
So for those businesses, very common to raise investment, to plug that gap of expenditure, not worry about making a profit. If and when that technology is finished and someone is willing to pay for it, you then begin to recover the losses that you've been incurring.
I see, okay.
Right? Now, if you are any other kind of business, really there is no excuse for you to not be focusing on generating cash and making profit.
Okay.
There may be a small period of time where you're like, you know what, I can't just turn up on day one and start making a profit. I need to like get an office, hire some people, pay for recruiters, do all of these things. It's like, okay, but then that needs to be a very like tightly bound period of time because your core business should be making money.
Okay.
Whereas in this case, the core business is building technology.
Building technology.
So that's how I would differentiate between ones that should care about profit and ones that shouldn't yet care about profit.
Understood.
I think this is the birth of a new segment. Questions from guys.
Yeah,
I love
honestly,
that. That was really
great. And I think loads of people will appreciate that questions being asked like
hopefully, hopefully I've helped some people out there who don't know as much as you guys know.
No, for sure, man.
Because I guess that's what you do, right? So you go to the company that's building the tech, and you basically
plugging that gap.
You try and get the investment. You try help them get the money to front load that building process.
It's interesting, right? Because like there's a skin in the game component, right? I think a lot of investors, well, in Europe, they will not invest typically pre-revenue. I kind of put that back to maybe pre-MVP, so they'll have some product that they can like at least show to a customer. So like,
what's pre-MVP?
Minimum viable product. So that means like they're like if they want investment like today, they can show me the product. A customer can use this product today.
Oh, okay.
There's some in America they might do vision-based investing. Where like, hey, we like this founder. We understand the mock-up. We like what they're going to build, but they haven't built it yet. So we're going to invest. They're going to build it. Boom.
Okay.
Invest, build it. Boom. I hit the mic there. But
cool.
I think for us, we need to see that there's a product built and we'll invest in. So like it really depends on the team. How quickly can they execute and ship product?
I guess
so
there's also different risk factors with each of those stages, I imagine. And also like if you're investing at the earlier stages, there's more, you can basically ask for more equity in that business.
Yeah.
And there's a higher return, but there's also a higher risk of basically just that business never going anywhere.
Yeah, like just basic first principles, that's completely correct, right?
Okay.
So if you think of the life cycle of a startup and you think of like day zero, where you just you and an idea, all the way to getting to the point where you might need some money from an investor, you might then need more money from an investor, you might then need more money, and then those are different stages of business. So like seed stage business or pre-seed business.
Is it Series A, Series B?
Yeah, so pre-seed is like, where I guess where Ken operates, which is just like, you've got a product, but you don't really have a business yet, right?
Yeah.
That's the very first stage.
Right.
And the next stage is seed, where it's like, okay, you've got a product, you've got a willing buyer, you just need to make all the other bits, bring all the bits in now to make those two transactions happen.
Yeah.
And then the next bit is Series A, which is like, right, you've got a product, you've got a buyer, you've got a team. You now need more money to actually do everything that's working 100 times at scale.
Right. Yes.
And then Series B is like more of Series A. Series C is more of Series B. And then you get into the realms all the way to maybe when you IPO on a public market or you get acquired.
Right.
Each one of those stages has different risk, right?
Yeah.
So you have what's known as product market fit risk at the very beginning, where it's like, okay, you may have a product, you may have a market, but do they both want each other?
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
That is the risk that like Ken's taking on, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll say like at that product market fit space, you have what's ICP or ideal customer profile, like which is hypothesized, like this is the person that would be buying, or this is the business that would be buying our product.
Yes.
The product market fit is like, okay, we've confirmed that this is real, this is actual, true.
Like people actually want this.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's it's the equivalent of saying that I might like blue jeans, right? And you can rely on that.
Yes.
But I might not like skinny blue jeans, and that's what you're making.
Okay.
Right?
And are
So
there's people that are like basically doing a lot of research and basically finding that out for these startup companies? Or is that the responsibility on the startup to get that and then present that to a VC?
Yeah, I mean, well, it depends. I mean, I think it's kind of different. Another conversation. You'll have those investors say they want coachable founders, right? Which might sit within what you're saying, but in reality, no investor wants a coachable founder. They want a donut company, which is every quarter they'll have an update and say this is what's going on, this is what's not going on, and we know what we need to do to fix these things.
Yeah.
You have your donut coffee and you leave, right?
Because at the end of the day, you want to make money.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to have fun doing it. You want to enjoy it, make good relationships, but you want to make money.
Yeah,
Exactly.
of course. Yeah,
And I think that's the key.
so at every stage of the business, you're trying to solve a different problem.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're solving the same problem at the next stage that you were solving at the previous stage, there's something fundamentally incorrect there.
Okay.
Right. In that you've either raised incorrectly now, as in you've raised the wrong amount of money at the wrong time.
Right.
Or there's something fundamentally wrong with your business
model. Yeah.
Because, and again, it's not linear completely. Like, you can't spell this whole journey out to the point where like anyone can do it. Like, there are going to be like squiggles in the journey. But yeah, just the knowledge that the first section of the race is a product market fit risk. The next section is like, okay, do you actually have like a scalable business? Right. So yes, you might have found 10 people that like this. Can you find 10,000 people that like this?
Right.
That's going to be the next risk.
Yes.
The next risk is going to be like execution risk. Okay, so you found the people, you found the product, but does everything break at scale?
Yeah.
Right. Because you just can't put
Does
an
the
infrastructure
website
around
break
it.
when you launch a product or whatever?
It's like, if the guy that sells chocolate strawberries in Covent Garden, right? It's like, yes, he can sell to 100 people. He can sell to 1,000 people.
Right.
But if I brought 100,000 people to his store, like his whole operation is going to fall apart.
Fall apart. Yeah.
And that's often why people like tech businesses, because they can scale capital light and easily.
They
So
build once,
True.
sell many times.
Yeah, I guess because it's not a physical product that doesn't need manufacturing or anything like
whereas
that.
cars,
Yeah.
very capital intensive. You need multiple factories all over the world. You need to ship them, logistics. So it's so much harder to scale.
Interesting. So I know I need to put you back on.
That's all right.
But it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Hopefully I can come back on at another time.
Stay tuned for another segment of Questions with Gaz.
Questions
Yeah.
with Gaz. Sounds good.
No, that's cool. Thanks, man. Thank you.
So anyway, we're looking for a new videographer. So I think to end it, we'll just do like a bit of a lightning round, mostly for people like Gaz and others who are trying to come up in the career in the sort of ever-changing world.
Yeah.
So like sort of top skills for the next generation. Is it coding? Is it same as ever?
No, I actually, I think we're probably at the point where coding is not as necessary a skill. Certainly having a sensitivity to how code works, and increasingly AI tools as they become more prolific. I mean, they're probably already there, but I've kind of tried to be quite consistent with advice for people that are coming up, that there are certain things that will never go out of fashion or get replaced by a robot. And the first is to have just like an insatiable curiosity for things. So, like, always have the audacity to ask the simple question, right, regardless of how it might look, etc. Number two is to really focus on working on public speaking and communication. I don't think that everybody needs to be a natural orator, but I think it's just a generally good way of learning to organize your thoughts on your feet, which sometimes people struggle with. And I think there are going to be increasingly a need for people to be able to articulate themselves, to be able to differentiate themselves in what will increasingly be quite a homogenous world, I think. And then, look, beyond hard work, which I don't think is ever going to go out of fashion, I would just always encourage people, especially in the earlier part of their career, to be just like ruthlessly promiscuous with things that they like and enjoy, because there's never been a better time, and not in
Ken's eyes.
I mean, I just felt the energy in
Wasn't it?
the side of my face.
I almost feel like I need to shower.
I just felt this promiscuous energy just on the whole right side of my body.
Was it ruthless?
Yeah. No, but I mean that. I think that if there's like, if to try and end on a high, there's never been a better time for people to be able to monetize their interests.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think someone just needs to say that for people to take confidence in it. Because that's never been the case, actually. Like, I could never have thought to have made a career out of, cricket or whatever, other than if I would decided to become a professional cricketer. But, now, if I really wanted to, I could probably create a blog or create a website or something that could easily monetize. And so, if you've really got something that you're interested in, like, try and make that your life's work.
If you could go back in time to your younger self, and I know this is obviously for you, like you've had a hell of a journey.
Yeah.
But one piece of advice that you would have given yourself.
In my mind, I sort of think of my life having started at the point when this whole journey started, and everything before that was sort of someone else. But if I was to give myself some advice, it would be to probably have the confidence that whatever your innate skills are, whatever my innate skills were that I thought were valuable, but the traditional system was telling me that they weren't, that ultimately I would come good. So I went through a very traditional school system, like very traditional, your grades basically make up your value in life, etc. Went to a very good school, and I guess struggled to some extent being in that environment. And so you then have a choice, right? Like, do you let that shape you positively, or do you let that shape you negatively? I got very close to letting it shape me negatively. And so I would probably just ask myself to double down on the positivity.
Best piece of advice for first-time founders?
The best piece of advice for first-time founders is
hire Cooper Parry.
Yeah, I knew that.
other than to hire Cooper Parry, is to focus on one core skill, and that is to improve the quality of your questions.
Okay.
I think that is the one unlock to many unlocks, in my opinion. I can give you many like finance related advice, like pieces of advice, but if you just focus on improving the quality of your questions, that'll get you a long way.
I guess tell me, like, we're not going to enter another tirade here, I promise.
No.
I guess a lot of times when I'm looking at early stage founders, I'm looking at this storytelling ability, and I guess that is kind of tied to the question making, because there's a product component. How well are you speaking to your customers? Are you asking the right questions?
Yep.
Are you going to be asking the right questions to find the right team members as you're bringing on? Same thing with partners.
For sure.
So it's all the stuff's kind of tied together.
And like, you will never know. There will always be more things that you don't know than you do know.
Yeah.
Right. As a founder, and I think that the best founders embrace that lopsidedness. Like, I know 20% of things. I don't know 80% of things, but I have absolutely no shame about asking simple questions about those 80% of things. And I think what that really does also is it forces the people that are responsible for the 80% of those things to have really credible, clear answers. Because if I was to ask you as a CEO of a business, small business, and you are the, say, head of finance, and I ask you a simple question like, hey, how many customers churn every month from our business? Because like, I just don't know how that works. Like, if I have the ability to ask a simple question like that, and you don't have the ability to answer that question, then not only does that create a certain dynamic that you need to be aware of, but it forces you to be better at your job, right? And so I think it's just a healthy thing to have.
Yeah. And actually, I'll do one more, just following on from our conversation with Basil, who was all on the family dynamics of business.
Yeah.
It was a really interesting and introspective episode.
Yeah.
And a saying that's came up a few times: generation to make it, generation to keep it, generation to lose it.
Yeah.
Obviously, looking at the wedding band, have you thought about how you might handle how your father handled you and brought you into the business, albeit under certain circumstances?
Yeah.
How are you going to teach those same values, the value of trust, etc., to the next generation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I've got a 12-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son, and it's amazing how much like your own childhood shapes the parent you become. Because for me, I'm just like, embrace your weaknesses. Don't worry, this stuff won't shape you. Like, all of the things I just mentioned earlier. And yeah, maybe I'm going down the same path of like one generation makes it and the other generation loses it. But like, for me,
We'll be right with you.
I'm just very much.
Can we just
sure
do that again?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Which part?
Just
all of it.
Just go back like a couple sentences.
Okay. Yeah. So I was saying that like maybe I'm the generation that's gonna like catalyze losing it.
No, I wasn't trying to
No. But the reason I say that is because so my entire I suppose parenting philosophy for my kids is to try and make sure that they have confidence in themselves, but B, that they are also just I don't really tend to try and I don't often treat them like kids, if that makes sense. So I have like just normal conversations about my work, about what it is that I do. My 8-year-old son the other day helped me write my LinkedIn post. Because I was just like, I want him to be involved. And that was actually one thing that my father didn't do, is that in all the time before he was unwell, his job was like this sort of thing that he did. Like I was not ever in any way involved in it, which actually made the transition much harder. But with my own kids, I really just want them to really be passionate about their passions. That is it, right? I don't care if that's finance. I don't care if it's law. I don't care if it's music, sport, or whatever. Is just to be so passionate about your passion that you become either world-class at it, and make a life for yourself out of it. Or you have like such an appreciation for the craft of whatever it is that you recognize that you haven't got what it takes to make it in that domain. Right. So like
radical self-awareness.
Yeah. So
That's tough.
And I think that it's a lot of the time it is the yearning for a life you can't have that makes you believe you could have had it. So sometimes it's almost like, give it to them. Like, yeah, go and play football against the best team in the local area and see if you can one day play for Manchester City. Yeah. Right? Like, I mean, I say that as a very real example about my son, who, is the nicest kid in the world. He's still kind of at the age where he thinks, I'm either going to be a professional footballer or I'm going to be a professional cricketer. Like, I'll figure it out when it gets close to the time. And I really want him to believe that is a reality until he himself has a realization that it either is or it isn't. I don't want to be the one that tries to, shape one way or another. Because I think that, I'll speak for myself, maybe the generation before us, out of nothing but good intention, always try to sort of protect children from disappointment. And therefore either didn't let them fulfill the potential that maybe that they did have, or didn't let them make their own mistakes to the point where they could have realized that this is a decision I need to pivot away from. It's going to be hard growing up as a 8 or 12-year-old in the life that they're going into. I think life was probably a bit simpler I'm probably a bit older than you guys, but for us. But I think that like having that ruthless self-awareness is going to be a very fundamental way of surviving it.
That can't be easy to stand by and sort of, hopefully he doesn't fail, but potentially watch him fail and learn that lesson himself.
Yeah, and it's not going to be nice, right? Yeah. Like I think it's really like the only way to do it. Really, I mean, ultimately we all end up making our own mistakes, whether it was because we were encouraged to or because we did it behind someone's back. Yeah. And so it's like I'll use my own example. I only ever thought that I would work in private equity. When I was training, I even shape-shifted my internship at PwC to be out of like audit and tax by contacting the M&A partner and be like, can I just come and intern in your department? I now having now my brother works in M&A. I know plenty of people in private equity. I could not have lived that life. I know that now, but I've learnt it through my own experiences, right? Nobody told me back then that maybe you should just try to do something else. And I appreciate the fact that I learned the lesson this way around than maybe letting someone else influence that decision.
No, I think we could all probably relate to that on some level. But thank you.
No, thank you guys. Thanks for having me.
I think we'll wrap it up there. Is there anywhere people can follow you? I'm slightly conscious that I feel in some sense I'm going to be pitching against Cooper Parry for entrepreneurs at some point. So please don't go find Asif. Yeah, you probably should, because he's a pretty good guy. So
yeah. Well, I mean, like the firm is at cooperparry.com, but you can find me on LinkedIn or any of the usual places.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Genuinely,
thanks, guys. Thank you. It's really had fun. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Please remember to like and subscribe to the podcast. We got over 100 reviews on Spotify, which is great. So please keep going. We want 200 by whenever we get there, which should be soon, hopefully. And on that bombshell, it's time to end the episode.